Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this second webinar updating you on the government's draft border target operating model, or TOM. First of all, I'd like to say welcome to attendees from across the UK, but also from the EU and indeed around the rest of the world as well. So obviously these measures and this new operating model affects importers kind of across all areas and regions. So welcome to everybody. We're going to take a slightly closer look at some of the detailed changes and proposals that are in the target operating model today. This webinar is brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade. My name is Richard Cree. I'm the content director here at the Institute. And really, this is a second in a number of webinars. We've got we did one kind of more or less immediately on the after the operating model was launched on the 5th of April. We had a representative from the Cabinet Office at that one discussing the planned timeline for the target operating model, but also some of the plans around the consultation and engagement exercise, the 6-week period of which is just closed. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. We're going to look in a bit more detail at what's involved in the operating model and what the implications of some of those changes might be. Ewan, could you move to the next slide, please? So with me today to discuss all these issues, we've got 3 fantastic speakers from the Institute's pool of experts. Kevin Shakespeare, back from as he was with the last on the previous webinar. He's our Director of Strategic Partnerships and International Development, and alongside a lot of other activity, he kind of leads on our all things related to TOM, as well as obviously single trade window activity. Thanks for joining today, Kevin. I think you managed to squeeze us in before a trip away, I think. So thanks very much. Good to see you here. And we've also got back again after her stunning performance in the last TOM webinar. We've got Laura Williams. So Laura's our Academy Customs and Trade Consultant, and she leads on kind of all things related to SPS and all of that stuff. She's going to cover off those issues. And last but not least, we've got Peter Murphy, who's a future border specialist at the Institute. And Peter's going to talk us through the kind of implications around groupage, the trusted trader schemes, and also the safety and security measures that are kind of coming down the track. So welcome to the webinar, Peter. And before we move on, just a couple of housekeeping notes from me. If you want to drop any comments or questions, you can do that. There's a drop-down button in the GoToWebinar control panel. That's usually on the sort of top right of your screen. There's a lot of information for us to get through today. So Kevin, Peter, and Laura have got presentations lined up. So probably more than discussion, there's going to be quite a lot of presentations today. But we will obviously be taking some questions, so feel free to fire us any questions. I'll try and prioritize, we'll get through as many as we can, but we'll kind of prioritize those that have the most relevance to the widest audience, I guess. So we probably won't go into too many company specific questions or kind of overly niche kind of sector queries that you have. And obviously the shorter and clearer you keep your question, the more it's likely to jump out. Finally, just before we move on, just to let you know, we will be sending out a follow-up email after this with all of today's slides, as well as a recording of the webinar. So you don't need to scribble down all the notes and to take detailed records of it. It'll all be sent out to you following the presentation. Can you move to the next slide? Let's just have a quick look at what we're going to run through today. So we're going to kick off with a quick overview of what's in TOM, what the objectives are, just to kind of refresh everyone's mind on that stuff. Then we're going to hand over to Laura. Laura's going to talk through sort of all the SPS aspects, looking at plant origin, products of animal, and a bit of just an overall summary looking in particular at the risk categorisation. I think that's a key aspect there. And then Peter's going to talk, take over. He's running what we call the back nine, I think, if you're a golfer, but he's doing the groupage, trusted trader schemes, and a bit of safety and security. And then we'll hand back to Kevin to kind of talk about what are the next steps, and what the Institute's doing, a little bit about how we can help and support. And then we'll wrap up with as much time as we've got left for some Q&A. But before we get Kevin to do a bit of an overview, I thought we'd get you to do just a little bit of work to start with. Could you move to the next slide, Ewan? And we're just going to run with this poll, which is: what understanding do you currently have of the target operating model? And if you can just pick which one of those, whether it's strong, you've got some understanding, a weak understanding, or no understanding at all. And Kevin, while we're doing that, just a quick reflection from you, I guess. We're at the end of this consultation period and engagement with business. Do you have a sense of how that's gone in terms of what, whether the government kind of got what they needed from it? Has there been a lot of positive engagement?
Yeah, so first of all, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending from various locations, and we're very pleased we have a global audience today, which shows the importance, I think, of trading with the UK, so both for UK businesses but also businesses overseas as well. So yeah, I think there has been a lot of interest from industry, and that's all parts of industry, whether you are an importing, exporting business, a wholesaler, distributor, a haulier, freight forwarder, port operator, and so on. So, or software port community systems. So there's been some really great interest, because this target operating model really has an impact on all of us, the whole industry. So I think there's been a lot of engagement. Certainly, I would say in the sanitary and phytosanitary space that the areas there have been a particular interest for some of our audience. So, but generally a really strong level of engagement, and really a strong level of views as well. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. So let's have a quick look at the results there. So I guess what you'd expect, people here, not a huge number have very strong understanding. I'm assuming the panel didn't answer the poll there, but so the vast majority have either got some or a kind of weak understanding, which is, I guess, the purpose of running today's session, really. So that I don't know, that kind of feels like it makes sense. But what we're going to do, we're going to run that poll again at the end of the session, and maybe we can see how things have changed, and we might be able to have a bit of a follow-up on that. But without any more waffling from me, let me hand over to Kevin to talk us through the kind of overview of where we are and what Tom is. Ewan, I think you need to move to the next slide, if that's okay. Over to you, Kevin.
Lovely, thank you, Richard. So just a couple of slides for myself to set the scene. So it is fair to say that the draft border target operating model does have potential to impact or change the way we trade, and both in the context of how we trade from a customs, a SPS, a safety and security perspective, and it has to take into account a lot of the different elements of trade at the border and trade with the UK, which clearly includes the biosecurity, the safety, and the public health aspects as well. So there have been quite a few engagement sessions by UK government, and today what we're going to try and do is really pick out some of the key areas of the TOM, but also look at the impact and where businesses may need to adapt, and that's businesses in the UK, but also businesses internationally. If we have the next slide, please. So just to summarize some of the objectives of the target operating model, it is a draft plan, and as indicated, subject to consultation, and the final plan is probably going to be issued around mid to late June. And as I've indicated, it covers procedures and systems with regard to customs, at the border, the safety and security declarations, but also the regulatory checks, certification as well. And yes, it's crucial to determine the UK's trade ties with the EU. And it's fair to say a lot of the debate has been around the European Union. But we mustn't forget that this border operating model also applies to the rest of the world. So yes, we are waiting for the risk categorisations for sanitary and phytosanitary for the rest of the world. But we mustn't forget that this impacts trade with the rest of the world, along with the upcoming developing countries trading scheme, DCTS, which is replacing the European Union GSP, Generalised Scheme of Preferences. So we mustn't forget the rest of the world, and this is not just about the European Union. If we have the next slide, please. So some of the key features is changes to the method and process, also looking at the role of technology as well. New requirements for likes of declarations, pre-notifications, and certification, obviously depending on the categorization of the goods, and also reference to trusted trader schemes as well, which we will look at today. So as I say, these have impacts on traders, but not just traders, again, the whole industry, logistics service providers and so on as well. So it's important that we take time to consider the implications and keep the whole industry updated. So I'm now going to pass back to Richard. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kevin. That was a really nice overview, I think, of it sets us up well for what's to come. And that is, if you could flip to the next slide, please. So we're now really into the sort of meat, I suppose, of the presentation, and we've got two elements to this, as I said before. So Laura's going to start by really looking at the kind of SPS side of things, the sort of animal and plant stuff. Yeah, so over to you, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So we're going to look specifically at the plants or the phytosanitary side first, and then we'll cover the animal health. So as you're aware, there has been some new legislation that has actually been published by DEFRA, which shows the low, medium and high risk categories. And this is part of the new TOM. And this is just for the EU, as Kevin mentioned earlier. It's not currently applicable to the rest of the world. That information will be published later on. So one of the big things to note is it will reduce, and we've highlighted there, the amount of checks that are actually required for goods coming in with phytosanitary requirements. So if you're in a medium or a low risk category, the requirements for physical inspection at the border will be dramatically reduced to previous inspections. We are really focused in Great Britain with risk-based imports, and that's not just on the actual product or the plant species themselves, that's also on the actual origin of those goods, where those goods are coming from within the international trade. So it's not just essential to understand the requirements for your phytosanitary certificate and what's required for you there, but it's also essential to understand the rule of origin of your goods and to be able to provide that as evidence as well. Next slide, please. So we're going to look a little bit more about the actual checking rates that they will do within those goods. And as you can see here, there's actually a dramatic reduction between 3 to 5% for most medium risk products within the plant or phytosanitary areas of imports and exports. There will be 5 to 100% for the highest risk products, and they will look at the frequency of checks of this. And again, this will also be based on the origin of those goods. If goods come from a higher risk area, they will therefore receive a higher inspection rate. During all of these assessments, all of the information is taken in from a biosecurity measure, and therefore constant risk assessments are done within these categories. So while they are designed to be stable, please be aware that they may well fluctuate depending on worldwide events. One of the biggest things you need to look at is targeted surveillance on low risk goods to detect new and emerging pests. So this is an area where, even though if you're bringing in low risk goods, you may be selected for inspection just from a biosecurity level so that they can actually retain information for future inspections. The traders must prepare for surveillance and incidental checks of low risk goods. Just because it's low risk doesn't mean that it won't be targeted for inspection, and you shouldn't make that assumption. The surveillance may take place at premises visited other than the plant health, other than the actual border itself. So they may come and do inspections later on once those goods have actually landed. Next slide, please. So within the border control posts and control points, these are designated locations for conducting the checks. The other thing to note with this is that current border control posts with their designated areas of responsibilities may be amended and slightly changed in the TOM model, in the draft version, and some of the port delivery points that weren't available for phytosanitary previously may now be available for phytosanitary. So that may well open up other avenues of supply chain for your business. The imports threat and horizon scanning subgroup will monitor the data to identify the trends. They will take this data not only from the documentation that's provided by the imports and exports, but also from any inspection and biodata that is collected during those inspections. That interception data will be available on the UK Plant Health Interception Notification System, and it should be regularly visited by traders. While, as we say, they are hoping to remain as stable as possible within their categories, international events may well change this. So it's always advisable to check this on a regular basis. The Plant Health Advisory Forum will be informed of proposed changes to inspection frequencies before their implementation. It's also important to note that these changes are due to come in interim measures, so they won't necessarily come in immediately. So it should give businesses time to plan for any changes within those inspection frequencies. You should also look out for the horizon scanning regime, which will be maintained to provide early warnings for new emerging plant pests and diseases. So if there's anything that is becoming advisable, or they're seeing a particular trend worldwide of anything, this is where this information will be provided to you as someone who uses phytosanitary requirements. Next slide, please. So here we've broken down some of the risk categories for you. And as we show you here, this is not an exclusive or exhaustive list. There are a lot more categories within the high category area. But we have just taken the main top ones for you so that you have a quick visual aid to refer to. If you want any further information, please visit the UK Plant Health Information Portal, and all items are listed within their categories there. This is the current legislation for the categories, specifically for the EU. The rest of the world, as we said earlier, will be published at a later date. Next slide, please. So here we have the medium risk categories, and this is what is expected to be the majority of imports within the phytosanitary categories or commodities from the EU. This is where also rule of origin is essential to actually be able to ensure that you can prove it's of EU origin, so that you don't either have extra requirements or actually have an impact within not just your phytosanitary, but also your fiscal responsibilities. Next slide, please. So here we have the low risk categories, and it's worth noting that there will be further assessment of ongoing based on the biodata, statistics and expert advice, just to name a few of areas that input for this information. So that further assessment will be ongoing, and it's not due to take place until April 2024. So items in the low category can move into a higher risk category at any given time, dependent on the risk assessment and the origin. But if items are deemed to be moving from a low risk to a higher risk category, the notifications will be given in advance to allow companies to be able to implement the necessary requirements to meet those standards. It's not expected to be something that happens on a regular basis, but it is also not something that can be ruled out. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at the products of the animal origin, where there are differential changes between products of plant origin. Next slide, please. So here we have the products of animal origin. So we will look at dairy, which is included on the next slide, but we also need to be aware that this could be anything that is processed products, and therefore anything that is going into the human chain or for human consumption. All of these items come under products of animal origin. Next slide, please. So dairy products, especially when it comes to our exports, but also a large volume of imports fall within the dairy products category within sanitary restrictions. So this can be anything from the raw milk to pasteurized. It could be the cream, butter, chocolate, whey proteins. The origin milk and dairy products must have been categorised as either low or medium risk under the TOM in order to allow these goods to move through at a more speedy rate. Obviously, a lot of these products, again within the phytosanitary as well, are actually time sensitive because they are perishable. So these have also been taken into consideration where the phytosanitary and sanitary rules that have been implemented are the minimum level required to maintain a security and safety level, not only from the products that we bring in, but also our own eco chain. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the risk categorisation, just as we have within the phytosanitary commodities, the animal products have been placed into risk categories, low, medium and high. As with all high-risk products, these will require a higher inspection rate, and these will be reviewed and updated accordingly, dependent on the risk assessment and worldwide events, such as any disease or if there has been any particular outbreak of any issue, such as foot and mouth. So these risk categorisations will be proportionate to goods and include dynamic changes. So the changes that are coming through is there has been quite a change within the risk categorisation for animal products. So as part of the preparation, you need to ensure that your goods have not moved into a higher risk category. It is important to understand that it is completely the importer's responsibility to ensure that compliance is met with regards to all the certification provided, and that all of the information is provided in a timely manner. There are some areas that are currently not covered in full for these products of animal and animal origin, and those are such as pets or racehorses. So currently DEFRA are still developing these policies, and this is where the consultancy period is so important. So a lot of the information provided during the consultancy period was actually gone in order to help create these policies. But as I said, DEFRA have not yet published the ones when it comes to equine or racehorses or pets. Next slide, please. So we also have live animal checks are currently conducted, as we say, at the point of destination and may be considered for inland checks based on the species by species risk analysis. The border operating points that currently do inspections for live animals is currently under review and may well change. So please bear this in mind when looking at your supply chain route of bringing those commodities over, whether it be pets or whether it be an actual commodity to go within the food chain. So The list for the border control points is published on the government.uk website, and if there are any amendments, those are also updated. You can sign up for updates on the government.uk website for such things. So this will actually help you amend any requirements. You're given 3 months notice if commodities need to move between risk categories, unless urgent protective action is required due to disease or control. This allows each trader to actually implement the necessary changes and requirements. So commodities may be risk assessed for their risk category entirely dependent on global outbreaks or alerts. And therefore, again, this is why the rule of origin to be provided with your goods is essential. There are emergency control measures that can be applied to commodities that pose an imminent risk to human or animal health. And these are the emergency measures that are put in if a disease outbreak occurs. Next slide, please. So here what we've done is given you a quick visual aid for understanding exactly what is required for both the high and medium risk items for animal and animal-based products. As you can see there, there's pre-notification, simplified health certificates and documentary checks and a higher degree of physical ID checks within the high risk category. As you work your way down, there are less requirements. Within the medium risk, as you can see, the actual requirements sound the same, but there will be less risk of inspection or documentary checks required for medium risk goods. Next slide, please. Low risk goods. Now, as you can see here, there are no health certifications required, but you still need to require a provision of pre-notification data sent and the commercial documentation in place, and that to be uploaded and sent in advance as well. As we explained earlier, you may well still be selected for a low risk inspection, and this may be to enable the biodiversity information with DEFRA to be collected so that they can keep a constant update on all of the information coming in, and also any disease or any issues that may well be presenting themselves within the food chain, so they can act swiftly and accordingly. Next slide, please. So as we did with the phytosanitary, here we've just taken a couple of the key top areas within the meat and poultry, and we've shown you which category they fall into. The ones to note here are the medium, which will have higher requirements, such as the export health certificate. All of these will require pre-notification within traces and IPAFs as well. Next slide, please. So here we have our composite products. And as it says here within our notes, these goods are currently exempt from official controls under Article 6 of Commission decision. And this means that you do not actually have to have an electronic health certificate for these goods to move into the UK from the EU. Now, also, just like the phytosanitary measures, please note that what we've discussed here is for EU specifically. The rest of the world products information will be made available soon. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at our fish examples, and these fall into a different category of certification, and they come under the catch certification. While certain fish, certain farmed fish does not require a catch certificate, all wild caught fish does, and they have their own categorisation as well. So most fish does require a catch certificate, so please bear that in mind if you are looking to onboard a new product within your supply chain, or if you're asked to transport any fish products within your business. Next slide, please. So we're going to just look at a summary of all of the SPS areas that we've covered so far today. Next slide, please. So here we've given you a visualization of exactly what the implications for high risk categorizations were before, and within the new TOM model, exactly what this means from a day-to-day business operation and inspection rate. It's worth noting on here that the expected inspection rate for both phytosanitary commodities will reduce, especially when it comes to medium risk goods and low risk goods. A lot of the extra requirements that are currently in place will not be required in the new TOM model. This should allow a lot of our goods to move through at a much swifter pace, and it also will mean that only selected areas of biosecurity will come under inspection. Because of all of the pre-notification, it means that the documentation inspections should be done prior to you actually landing at your border control point. Next slide, please. So again, we've given you the same visualization here with regards to the animal products. And we are expecting to also see quite a substantial reduction in inspection requirements for medium risk commodities for animal products or for what we call sanitary products. This will mean that these goods, again, can move through the border control point more swiftly and move through the green lane areas. Now, obviously, we have discussed very briefly the trusted trader schemes. Now, we will look at those in a lot more detail within the presentation, but these trusted trader schemes will also aid companies in order to move through the green zones when moving SPS products. Next slide, please. So the government is currently looking into schemes that will ease the requirements, but when it comes to those are going to be product specific. So there will be different trusted trader schemes when it comes to both the phytosanitary and the animal health products. But Peter will cover those for us in a bit more detail later on. Please know that the modern border system is meant to be established to streamline and create an effective global risk-based controls. This has been designed to hopefully in order to work with the single trade window, which is due to come into effect in 2025. So all of these steps that have been taken in the changes within our customs industry in the last few years, such as CDS, the TOM model, and the single trade window, are all designed to move us forward to be a much more active member on an international trade stage. Specifically, the sanitary and phytosanitary goods will be categorised based on their inherent and country-specific risks. So as I said, it may be that a product that is imported from the EU is considered low risk, while exactly the same product imported from the rest of the world is considered a medium or high risk. So the rule of origin for your goods will be just as important to provide the evidence as it will be to provide the certifications as well. As we've touched on, there are pilot schemes for the authorised trusted traders, and these will aim to develop assurances and equivalency to official controls and allow in-house checks to be done. There are also governance structures which will oversee the pilots, ensuring that the biosecurity and animal health and welfare and public health are all considered within those pilot schemes, and that we don't have any areas of vulnerability or exposure within those schemes. Schemes can only be trusted if they meet those high standards. Next slide, please. So the charges for the checks at the border, and this is a key point to note, because these are actually purely based on each border control point. These are not set out by the government and they are not dictated to by the government. So that's why we can only estimate the range to be between £20 and £43, depending on which border control point you actually choose to use. So there are two different types of fees that are introduced in association with the SPS checks at border control points, and that is your border control point usage fee. So that's the fee for actually utilising their facilities. And then there are the inspection fees, and these are actually payable to the Port Health Authority, and these are so that DEFRA or AFRA can actually do the inspections on your goods and allow them to be released for onward travel and to their point of destination. In some cases, there may be other charges that may apply for non-SPS checks of the goods. So you always need to bear these in mind. And if in doubt of any charges or the fees that are applied, you can always contact each border control point in order to actually find out those fees. Next slide, please. So if you could bring up the graphics for me there, please. So here we have our target operating model timeline, and this is very important for anyone utilising SPS, whether you are the importer or you are the mode of transportation for those goods. The actual introduction of the health certification on imports for medium risk animal products, plant products, and high risk food and feed of non-animal origin will be introduced on the 31st of October this year, which means the actual inspections will start to take place. As you may be aware, the EU currently do inspections on their side of the border, but we have not implemented these currently. These were delayed. These will be coming into effect on the 31st of October and may have an impact on your actual lead time of moving the goods from their supplier to their destination. Next section, please, Ewan. So, as you can see here as well, we also have the introduction of the documentary and risk-based identity and physical checks coming in on the 31st of January. So we are doing it in stages so that all of the implementations aren't coming in one hit. That means not only do us as traders and hauliers and people who work within the import and export industry have time to get used to these changes and implement any process or procedural changes to make use of these, but it also means that the government, therefore, has time to ensure that they've worked out any issues in stages. 31st of October next year is where the requirements for the safety and security declarations for EU imports come into effect. And again, Peter will go into those in a little bit more detail in a moment. Next section, Ewan. So as you can see here, there is a technical foundation for the UK single trade network within November and December of 2023. So this is where we will start looking further into the single trade window and exactly how this will be utilised within our international trade. But if you require any further information on our single trade window, we do have an expert in-house, and that is Mr. Kevin Shakespeare. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest things that you should prepare for as a trader is making sure that you understand the requirements of the goods that you're bringing in and what inspections that may trigger come the 31st of October. What are your categorisations of your goods? Have you actually got the classification of your goods correct? And also ensure that you have your evidence in place for your rule of origin of the goods. You really need to understand from a supplier's perspective if they understand the full requirement come these changes. Also work with them to implement any supplier, any documentation changes that are required if your goods have moved from a low to a medium category. The biggest thing is ensuring that you actually sign up for the updates and you keep an eye on any changes of categorization of any goods due to global awareness. Next slide, please. And on that note, I will hand back to Richard.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Laura. Fantastic. Well, let's just see, you mentioned there about kind of risk categorizations and how confident and the importance of getting ready for it. So let's launch this poll and just ask you how confident you're all feeling about this. There's been quite a few questions come in, Laura, while you were talking. So there's one interesting one. You mentioned that it's kind of the importer's responsibility to be compliant. And Katya just asked a question as to whether that's the case regardless of the kind of Incoterms that you're trading on.
When you're making an import declaration, it is your legal requirement to ensure that you have met all of the requirements to make that import, no matter what Incoterms are being used. So if you are the importer of record, you have a legal requirement to ensure that's an accurate tax document.
Perfect. That's just a nice, simple one to clear up. So, so let's just see. We're getting answers to this. I'm going to close this poll after a minute just to keep it relatively quick. And yeah, let's share the results so you can see there. Was that pretty much what you'd expect in terms of confidence around this? It seems to be sort of 50% either confident or fairly confident.
I would expect that, or maybe slightly higher. I mean, it depends on whether or not you've had a chance to really review the categorisations that were published and review them versus your own supply or product list. So the one thing I would always recommend doing is ensuring that you do a regular or a yearly review of your commodities. That way you don't get caught out by any changes with regards to either categorisation or extra requirements such as phytosanitary or electronic health certificates.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you for that presentation. It's time now. Ewan, could you move the slide on to the next slides? And yeah, let's hand over now to Peter Murphy, who's going to talk us through groupage and trusted trader schemes, and also the proposed safety and security measures that are coming down the track. Peter, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be talking on this subject. Very passionate to my heart. So I'm going to move first of all through groupage. So we can have the next slide, please. Yeah, so groupage, I know a lot of you will know what groupage is, but just in terms of the TOM, it's a single consolidated truck or a container or trailer. In terms of the container, it could be a lesser container load. That's what the LCR means, and consisting of multiple products with several exporters or importers. So it could be a truck that's consigned to one consolidation depot to a destination depot for devanning and onward delivery. It could be that the truck is to be consigned from one consolidation depot to multi-drop deliveries to different importer delivery addresses, or it could be a trailer that's going to collect from multiple shippers or exporters and deliver to one receiving hub. Move on to the next slide, please. Have we got the next slide, please? Great stuff. Yeah, so in terms of groupage, we have to consider various different aspects of consolidation. Particularly now with the TOM, because as has already been mentioned, the checks for sanitary and phytosanitary goods, it's very important that you get the right classification for that, that you know whether it's a medium or low risk for all of the participants that are consolidating within that groupage load. So at the consolidation point, we really do have to this category, and it's, well, as already been mentioned, the biosecurity risk and the public health protection is very important. And we move a lot of goods into the UK, particularly from Europe, on groupage trailers. So this is a particular area which the government have paid quite a lot of attention to in terms of listening to what carriers and hauliers have said, particularly in the new in the TOM engagement webinars that were issued not so long ago. So best thing is to consider whether you've got low risk or medium risk in the same trailer. Obviously, if you have a medium risk, then and you have the rest of the goods at low risk, then obviously that medium risk one is going to could cause you even more difficulties when you get to the actual control point. One shipment, for example, of animal or plant-based products stopped at the UK border for examination could delay the whole groupage consignment. So it is very, very imperative that you check before you actually move the trailer, and you check every shipper's details in that trailer to make sure that your documentation is going to be correct for going and is not going to cause you any problems later on down the line. So moving on to the next slide, please. So there are products, as been mentioned before, and they will from the 31st of October, they will require electronic health certificates. Products that are low risk won't be required to have EHCs, export health certificates, but they will be not subject to regular border checks. They will, however, be subject, as has already been mentioned, to spot checks, and so you can't rely on just it being a low risk that it won't be inspected by government agencies. The complexity of obtaining a health certificate is EHC, in the majority of cases, will therefore be removed. So most of the low risk goods coming in, apart from this spot checks that will still be in place, they will be removed. So a good volume of the shipments that are coming in, particularly on groupage, into the UK, won't be subject to so much legislation in terms of biosecurity checks and that sort of thing. Products that are medium risk will require export health certificates to enter GB and will be subject to reduced levels of intervention at the GB border. Slide, please. So simplification and digitalization is going to remove some of the detail that's now considered on the health certificates. The phytosanitary certificates have already been simplified, so the data set that phytosanitaries were subjected to, a lot of the data has been already removed by DEFRA and Port Health Authority to ensure that it's as simple as possible and only the relevant data is collected. So that has already happened. There is also, for the health certificates, there'll be more detail at the moment. They are looking at, DEFRA and Port Health, looking at what data is required, actually data, real data that they need. All the essential data will be left in for obvious reasons, but there is some data that can be taken out of that to make that the process of raising export health certificates at the time of preparing your shipment. The electronic phytosanitary certificate, ePhyto, that's due to be rolled out from May 2023, and the digitalised export health certificates rollout plan is planned for. There is a recognition of additional flexibility on these requirements of groupage loads, and although we've had the kind of official feedback from government agencies, and the questions have been considered now and looked at and studied, they are still very much open. They stress this, that they're very much open to feedback from carriers, intermediaries, and the traders. So anybody in the supply chains coming into the UK, they are very interested in feedback and what can be done to assist, particularly with the groupage side of things. There's also recognition of the extra costs, loading and devanning of trailers that may be occurred as a result of the forthcoming changes. So those are considerations, again, that we need to bear in mind, and government are listening to ways of, or suggestions of ways of reducing those costs. Slide, please. Okay, so we've covered the groupage. Now we're going to go on to the trusted trader schemes. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So at the moment, there are trusted trader schemes that the government operates. There's the AEO Economic Operators Scheme, which is duty and security scheme. So AEO-E, for example, EEO-S, for example, is for security, and you've got the AEO-C for customs. The AEO-S will be considered in some of these other trusted trader schemes that we're going to talk about. So because of the extra security that's provided for transit, that will be considered for the three schemes that I'm just about to talk about. the AEO and the accredited customs and consignor are for export and transit movement. So both of these are essentially HMRC customs accreditations. So they are audited by HMRC. With the introduction of the TOM, this will now be the approach really. It comes under DEFRA and Port Health authorities, and they have introduced, still in conjunction, it's not ruling out HMRC, so they will work collaboratively with the Border Force and the customs agencies. The new schemes are designed to be rolled out to SMEs as well as large traders. So there are 3 new schemes. Okay, there's the accredited trusted trader, the authorized operator status, and the technology assurance scheme. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll just explain what those are. So we look first of all at the accredited trusted trader scheme. It was mentioned earlier that there will be pilots for allow the ATTS these pilots will allow frequent importers, and I should stress frequent importers and larger volume movers of products of animal origin and animal byproducts. There will be a potential to reduce the need for routine physical checks at the border control point by taking responsibility for carrying out routine checks and sampling themselves to ensure the protection of the biosecurity animal. So if, for example, you have a biosecure site somewhere in Europe, and you want to bring in, and you have good IT systems, you have good methods of traceability in terms of batch tracing, or in terms of the catch certificate, the actual batch, you can trace back to source. So provenance of the goods, again, mentioned earlier about origin. If you can do those kind of checks, then this scheme, then they will consider you taking out the routine checks and therefore not having to have so many routine physical checks at the border control points rather. Details of the scheme will be detailed once the TOM has been published. DEFRA are still cooperating with industry, and details will be issued on how to apply and take part in the SPS pilot trials, which are anticipated to last from 6 to 12 months. DEFRA will then review the pilots, and traders who are successful and provide sufficient assurance will be accredited. Have we got the next slide, please? Great stuff. Okay, so in terms of membership of the ATTS, you must be a registered business. So there's a list of things here. Have a good compliance history. That's customs, and also in terms of your biosecurity type of history, in terms of applying export health certificates or phytosanitary certificates, that sort of thing, and you have a good history with DEFRA and the Port Health Authority. You have to have a named responsible person for identification in terms of management and monitoring of risks, usually at director level. You need to implement the government-produced standard operating procedures to ensure the equivalent assurance of public health and biosecurity safeguards. So if you have things like ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, then that will certainly go towards this membership, because it shows you have very good procedures. You have a biosecure premises and infrastructure. So in the receiving of the goods into the supplier's premises is considered safe. It has a good good system for recording inbound shipments and batch traceability. And then your ERP system, the mainframe system that you're using, is very robust and can also give information and data to you for your export from, say, the EU to the UK. I'm only using that because we must consider this as also going into the rest of the world, but particularly with Europe. Provide end-to-end supply chain assurance. So again, secure. So that could be your details of how your shipments usually move, the usual patterns or routes that you take. It could be that you have good recording information in terms of temperature control, which could be also associated with sealed containers in terms of GPS tracking devices. So in order to provide end-to-end supply chain assurance, and also have suitably trained staff who can act independently of one another. So you have a backup. You have backup staff that can continue if somebody's off sick or ill, and that can be, they are suitably trained up to be able to continue operate under this ATTS membership. You can could we have the next slide, please? Brilliant. Okay. So I meant to say that under the ATTS, the feedback that we've had from government at the end of their TOM webinar and engagement period, they did look at exploring a more flexible approach, developing one scheme for all. So there would be minimum requirements to be a trusted trader. The additional benefits could be built over time by a trader. They're going to adopt a more flexible model, so it's a more modular approach. Additional benefits could be added as they are developed and piloted. And instead of just a standalone technology scheme, they're looking for pilots that can show a technology benefit that, if successful, would be part of this approach. So this is not government policy. They're just looking at exploring ideas and getting feedback before they actually proceed with this. They recognise there are some limited benefits to the scheme in some cases. Self-checking will only be feasible for a limited number of businesses with sufficient resources and have high volumes of trade. So it's important not to forget that the actual smaller, medium-sized companies that would potentially lose out on this. And there's another scheme which we'll talk about in a moment, which will assist us with that, or could assist small and medium companies. In terms of, as I've got here, the role of the, there's another scheme which is the role of the authorised operator, and that is a new scheme which is really to do with the actual, it's to do with plants and plant health. So the role of the operator is to ensure the suppliers obtain necessary phytosanitary certification, submitted pre-notification and customs declarations, so that's the bio pre-notification. Declare goods for inspection at their designated control point. Ensure premises is designed and customs authorised, so the control point is designated, so it's a recognised point. Make sure there's no suspicions of non-compliance with the import to consignment, and they're noted within an agreed time frame to the relevant authority. So they'll also be responsible for performing their own risk-based and identity checks and reporting the outcomes to the relevant UK Health Authority and inspect the goods to prescribed procedures, keep records and maintain and monitor inspection outcomes to the relevant Port Health Authority. Slide, please. So the other scheme is a technology assurance scheme. This scheme is being piloted with the aims to utilise data that is already collected by traders, i.e. supply chain data, and access additional data using specific devices, as I mentioned before, like digital seals or temperature trackers. This will provide additional assurance to the UK government, enabling a proportionate reduction in physical checks. So the IOE and international trade we have been involved in the ecosystem of trust pilots, and this has helped to have the government introduce this scheme, because they're hoping that a similar kind of thing using digital corridors or ecosystem of trust, as it's called, will provide the assurance and the platform and ability to be able to provide the information to government. Slide, please. I beg your pardon, sorry, I should have gone back, sorry, I beg your pardon. So in terms of the membership of this, the TAS, there'll be further testing and stakeholder engagement, but it will be used to establish the final membership criteria. They haven't decided that yet, but as a minimum, the technology assurance system members they'll be registered or approved by their local authority, the Food Standards Agency or the Food Standards Scotland, as a food business, or registered with or approved by the Animal, Plant and Health Agency as an animal bioproduct business. We've already said before that they need they can't have any adverse sanitary or phytosanitary compliance history. And they must have a record of pre-notification since January 2022, other than companies importing solely from the island of Ireland, and have no adverse customs compliance history. The TAS proposals will build on the ecosystem of trust that I've already mentioned. So they need to conduct, there needs to be more further tests and exploring other forms of technology, especially to those who provide animal health assurances as well as food safety, to mitigate risk sufficiently so that reduced check benefits can be offered. Moving on to the next slide, I think that will be in security. So, safety and security. As was said in the timeline earlier, on the 31st of October 2024, there'll be a requirement for safety and security declarations for EU imports to come into effect. As part of this, there will be a reduced data set for all importers and use of the single trade window to remove duplication where possible across the different sets of data that must be submitted before the goods arrive in the UK, such as safety and security, sanitary, phytosanitary, and pre-lodged customs data. So this is being introduced in conjunction with the World Customs Organization's SAFE framework, which also became a requirement for trade between the EU and the GB at the end of Brexit transition, but is now being introduced as a requirement, as a legal requirement to have this data. So safety and security data will be required for movements from GB into the EU, with a new data model based on the ecosystem of trust pilots, as mentioned before. The data collection will be reduced to security critical items. So again, there is a lot of thought being given by the government agencies as to what they can reduce that data set to. So that will be only required data. There will also be, in addition to these critical items, there will be other data that can be continued sent through to the government agencies. So extra information can still be provided. It's not cutting that data off. Safety and security GB system will be used to facilitate real-time networking and the analysis of data sets. So things like trade corridors or ecosystem of trust schemes may be able to, they will be able to provide information, trusted information at source from when the goods actually are beginning to move. And in some circumstances, using some provenance reports, may be able to go back even further into the supply chain to get more detail on the origin of the goods before the actual goods move. Slide. So this safety and security information for transit movements, NCTS will replace safety and security declarations with a combined transit security accompanying documents. Now, I will just mention that the new computerized transit system, NCTS 5, that has to be introduced under the Commonwealth Common Transit Convention, if I could say that properly. Under the terms of the Common Transit Convention, all members must move to NCTS 5. So the HMRC will switch this on from NCTS 4 to NCTS 5 on the 16th of November 2023. And they're switching on, that's Great Britain, so it's England, Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland will all be switched over at the same time. And then we have to think about, right, okay, the next phase will be the new computerized transit system, NCTS 6, which is currently scheduled for implementation across the Common Transit Convention countries by June 2025. And this will allow functionality to be able to use transit security accompanying documents in place of separate safety and security and transit declarations. This will mean that when you're moving goods through other countries which have opted into adopting this transit security accompanying documents, traders using transit will only need to submit one transit security accompanying document for a transit movement. Unlike currently, where you have safety and security declarations need to have to be submitted for every customs territory crossing. So that's quite significant. Additional waivers from the safety and security declarations will be introduced to reduce burdens of low risk movements. As already been mentioned, the outbound fish caught in UK territorial seas and landed outside the UK. Outbound transit movements for goods moving through GB under transit ENS has been made within 14 days. Outward free port goods, advanced safety and security information is available and goods have been moved to the free port for a specific duration. So there are waivers for these three outcomes if you are moving these times. Fast parcel operators should see a benefit from the new model of the reduced data set. Amendments to the actual quantity time of sea crossing to be permitted for fast-paced ro-ro movements. What that means is amendments can be made if something changes, for example, the amount of goods or the time of the sea crossing. Feedback has been received to the government, and they have come back and said that there will be allowed amendments up to, at the moment, it's there's a rule which is submit the declaration within 2 hours before the goods enter GB, and that's currently the rule for short sea journeys. Safety and security declarations must be accurate and completed where it's possible. Whereas what they're saying now is that you can move right up to the point of the point of departure, so you can make amendments at that time. So there is a kind of easement on that. So that will allow, for European shipments, it will allow that to be done at the last moment at the port of departure. Moving on to the next slide, I think that is the end of what I have to say. So I'll hand back now to Richard. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very detailed coverage of all of that. Let's just quickly jump to another poll, which is around the kind of trusted trader schemes that have been talked about. Let's find out how confident you are at actually using those schemes. So, which are you kind of willing and confident, fairly confident, unsure, or just waiting to assess what the final scheme looks like? Or schemes, I should say, really. And I'll just, again, we'll do a fairly quick snap poll here rather than taking up too much time. There have been some questions around this, Peter, going through. I just wonder that going back to the point you made around groupage early on and the impact of that, there's some questions around whether hauliers might just kind of refuse to take mixed mixed lorry loads in terms of categorisations or whatever, just because that risk of that risk of things getting slowed down at the border because of checks on one part of a groupage, as it were. Is that something that you're expected to see?
Well, there are always people that might be tempted to bend the rules, but make no mistake that if they are caught, they will obviously face fines and potential imprisonment. So I wouldn't initially think there will be a softer approach by government, but if they're knowingly moving those goods, and really they have a responsibility at the start of the journey for moving SPS or animal products to make sure that they know what they have in their loads, and that they have a legal responsibility. So if it's traced back, and bear in mind a lot of these goods have to be traced back in terms of their batch, their origin, all that information has to be contained on commercial systems. Should checks be done by DEFRA or port health authorities, there is that they can very easily pick up that data and say, why did this trailer not report in? Can you show me where this journey data was collected? And that could then throw up the fact that there's a non-compliance and action could be taken. So I would not encourage groupage drivers to do that. I would encourage them right at the start of the journey, like as I mentioned, consolidating and make sure they do
make it there
into consideration.
Let's have a quick look now at these. This is the poll results from confidence around the trusted trader schemes. So kind of, I mean, weighted more towards unsure and kind of waiting to assess what it all looks like, really. That probably makes sense, I guess, in terms of where people are.
It does, because I think that the ATTS scheme for the live animal, well, for animal products and byproducts they haven't issued they've issued guidelines on it, but what they haven't done is said how to apply yet. So there aren't actually details of how the application should be made. However, on the AOS, there is you can start to apply, and there is a that you can apply to DEFRA on their email, and you can put forward a case for you to join that AOS scheme now. So that you can apply for that to be a pilot. And bear in mind that they are looking for a cross section right across business and they will select the pilots that they want to give a broader outcome and possibilities.
Makes sense. I think we're going to jump on to the next slide, please, Ewan, and I think Kevin, I don't know if you want to come back in now and just talk a bit through the kind of overall next steps of Tom. I'm conscious of time. We've got about 15 minutes, so we've got a few slides around next steps, and then maybe we might get a couple of questions in as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think also just to summarise, there's been a lot of information to take in today, and obviously the length of this webinar has been slightly longer than those we've had previously. So that's in recognition of the amount of content, and obviously do bear in mind that these slides will be made available to you. I think obviously that we will keep industry updated, and we will continue to work with all sections of industry and every actor in the trade journey. We would stress obviously the need for people to get ready, for businesses and the various logistics providers and so on to prepare going forward. We will be having a session with EU businesses specifically aimed at the European Union in the next few weeks, and we'll have a similar session with businesses in Africa as well. So we're keen obviously that you can get something very specific to your circumstances as well. So I think coming back to these trusted trader schemes is that what we want to make sure is that all businesses, irrespective of size and what you do, have the opportunity to participate. Now, there'll be a number on this call today that we've already had discussions with, be that trade associations, be that other organisations, and in some cases individual businesses and logistics providers. So we have several that we're already looking at, and we'll be very much looking to take those forward. We can't promise obviously that every trusted trader that everyone wants us to get involved with will be able to do. However, if you are interested, please contact us. Obviously, let us know your product, your trade route, the number of suppliers from, in the case of UK, that you have from the European Union, and certainly we'll do our best to consider that, because we're very keen that every part of this industry has the opportunity to work together, and no one is disadvantaged just by virtue of size or knowledge. So that's really important. The rest of the world, risk categorisations are due out probably in the summer. Obviously, we need to define when the summer is. So that's going to be key as well. And we'll be providing further details when that happens, and having lots of conversations with the industry. As we deal with lots of countries globally ourselves, the Institute, we're particularly interested also in the rest of the world categorisations. So that's it from me, and now let's have time for questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. Ewan, could you just move some slides on? I think we'll move on a couple of slides to the Q&A. Yeah, so we've got some time now. I don't know if we want, who do we want to come in? Well, it's hard to know where to begin. We've got so many questions. Right, let's start with some from early on. And there were some questions around, for Laura, really around plant products, and I guess this idea of for fruit and veg, for example, they're in the low category by and large, but is there a risk that these products might move to medium, and kind of in so doing introduce significant changes to processes for the importation of those products?
Yes, so as we said earlier, the idea of the high, medium and low risk categories is to try and remain as stable as possible. So lots of assessment has been done prior to actually putting them into categories. The majority of the goods within the low risk category, I would be surprised if they move up to a higher risk, such as medium, but never say never. You never know what kind of disease outbreak might happen within a region where these goods are imported from. So while I would not expect them to move up from a low risk category, it is not unheard of that they might.
And one very specific question that was asked, does this cover soil and kind of organic material like that coming from the EU? Is that covered under this as well?
Yes, that's all covered under phytosanitary products as well. So in some cases, when it comes to certain products, it might be covered within the UK under the Forestry Commission, such as wood and bark, which is often used within planting regimes, or actual soil or substrate compost does also within certain chemical composures does actually require phytosanitary certificates as well.
Okay, fantastic. So let me move on to ask some questions here around some of the trusted trader schemes, because in fact, Kevin, there's one question I've got for you. You may know this or not, but there's a question about why is it called Tom in the first place, right? Why is it not referring to something? Why is it not something more relevant or specific, like, you know, something more obvious, I guess, like calling it the viewer has called it kind of SPS procedures. You know, why are we not? Why is it just complicating things by calling it Tom? And, you know, I don't know where that comes from and what the origin of that is.
I think some of the origin is that post EU exit there was the border operating model, and I guess when we use the word border, we actually think of the physical borders and for example the ports. So a lot of it has come from that, and now it's called the border target operating model. But we have to, and the point on SPS is a good one, but we have to think about this in the context of, although it's the border, it impacts how we trade throughout the whole supply chain, and how we interact with suppliers, with logistics providers, with the software community, and so on. So I think we just need to look at it as it's the way we trade. Is a good way of looking at it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you.
Sorry, Richard, I was just about to say, my gut feeling is that the reason there might be some of this confusion is originally the SPS controls were due to have come into effect last year and they were delayed. So because of that delay, there just happens to be this time overlap where the new target operating model is being released and implemented alongside the delayed SPS requirements that were coming in. So I think it's just unfortunate timing.
Yeah. It all kind of come together, hasn't it? So, Peter, there's a question here around the trusted trader schemes. In fact, there's been a couple around this, but whether this is just for importers or is it only importers really that can apply for this trusted trader schemes, or is it kind of wider than that?
I think that they can apply for exports, but really it's difficult to see what the benefits would be for exports. This is primarily for imports, so this is really receiving goods at border control points, and it could be in certain circumstances. There could be that you could prove, or you need to know for an export going to a border control point. To start off with, you might have a trusted trader that could be authorized under one of the trusted trader schemes. So it's not. I wouldn't say it's totally. You know, I would say it's possible that could apply.
Okay. And what I've got is a question around safety and security, really, and whether or not there are any considerations for how introducing the E&S declarations on movements from the EU how do we think that might impact supply chains? Is the question. You know, is it likely to have a big impact, or you know, do we think it'll kind of things will adapt fairly quickly?
Well, I think the ENS declaration, safety and security declarations, have been around for some time now, since the 9/11 episode. So safety and security has been, from the rest of the world, has already been in operation. We've had a kind of suspension of it with Brexit, and now what we're doing is reintroducing those particular types of the information is now being required. And the good thing is that the government is now looking at reduced data sets in order to be able to provide that information. So with the reduction, hopefully that will outweigh some of the actual. It's a positive in terms of making the border agencies aware of the goods arriving, and therefore they can make better risk assessments. Whereas at the moment they're arriving, they're in the country, and then they're having to make considerations. So ports, for example, there could be congestion because you're waiting for extra information to be provided to the border force people or DEFRA or port health authorities, in which case that could hold up shipments. So although it is extra work and it's extra work for carriers, I do take that point. There are benefits, I think, before the goods arrive, that maybe they're not subject to so many checks because they're getting that upfront information.
Yeah.
That's I'm not saying that's up to the individual port authorities, obviously, to make that decision.
Yeah, of course. One other hopefully quick question, but is maybe for you, maybe for Laura or for Kevin, but is there a plan for DEFRA to publish risk categories by HS code? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, there has been talk about doing that. I'm not sure when that's going to be introduced, but there have been questions that were posed in the TOM webinars to DEFRA asking whether the information could be added to the tabs in the tariff, so that you would automatically go to commodity code, you would then see that information in the tabs. But that has not been worked out, and that's certainly not policy yet. But I do understand that would be perhaps an easier way of looking at it. But at the moment, I believe that they're looking at commodity code, but to do like a matrix by commodity code and origin. To specify or make it. I mean, it's quite clear at the moment by exception, but I think people would like to have some sort of reassurance by having the commodity code. So I can see where that question comes from.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm gonna head towards the exit, I think, at this point. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm just going to launch one final poll, which is just to see whether now after we kind of been to the webinar, whether there's a better understanding. We'd like to see that move closer towards. Well, that's looking quite well at the moment. I'm going to leave it to run for a few more minutes, or a minute or so. In the meantime, what I'd really like to do is to say a huge thank you to Kevin Shakespeare and to Laura and Peter for their really excellent presentations. It's really been great to have you all here and for answering your questions. And thanks to the audience for joining and for supplying some great questions. Thanks also, there's quite a big team behind the scenes that's kind of helped with the presentation and putting that all together. So thank you all very much. And if I close the poll and share the results, we can probably see that everyone's got some or a strong understanding of where things are moving in terms of TOM. So hopefully that means we've done quite a good job, or you've done quite a good job. I haven't had much to do. So Laura, Kevin, Peter, once again, thank you all very much for your time. Thank you for contributions. As always, I guess go to export.org.uk and hopefully you'll find something there that will answer any questions or challenges or problems that you've got. So thank you all very much indeed for coming along. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Hopefully we can jump off and exit exactly at 2:30. So fantastic. I just feel like just a minute now. I'm kind of talking without, not managing to talk without repetition or delay. But anyway, excellent. I think we'll end it there. So
Thank you
all.
very much, Richard.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.